roadmaster. Yeah, whoa, roadmaster. If you think my office sweet, wait until we hit that plushback scene. Come on, baby, take me out in your swelling roadmaster. Come on, baby, come on, baby. Drive me.
What you need, when you need it. On the Horn. OnTheHorn.com.
Okay, one of these days, one of these days, I'm going to have to figure out what NewsTalk should do as far as, I don't know. Suppose we could try this. Hold on a second.
There we go.
It sounds newsy.
I was going to ask you what was with the rooster.
You know, the intro stuff, just to wake people up. It's like, folks, it's NewsTalk tonight. I'm Dave Moore. Our friend Jen Just is here.
Hi.
And we are going to be talking about some of the stuff that's been happening at the Capitol today. And I'll just bring that down a little bit. Among other things, I'd like to talk about how the Supreme Court has upheld damages in a discrimination case, first of its kind, racial profiling heading to Malloy's desk, the budget. Can we ever stop talking about the budget? No, I don't think so. Education reform, which is directly related to, the budget, because reform's going to cost money. Face it. Everything costs money. And the last thing I wanted to touch on tonight was how the Latino caucus has now endorsed Chris Murphy for the Senate seat. And the question is going to be whether or not that has actually started ringing the death knell for another candidate's candidacy. And we can touch on that in a little bit. But first, in a case that is really considered to be first of its kind, the Supreme Court of the state of Connecticut has upheld damages in the amount of $94,500 for a gentleman who was discriminated against on the basis of his gender identification. It was starting in 1999. It carried on through 2004. It's a state company that's located in Bloomfield. And basically, the guy was being harassed for having been identified as being gay. He never really fully came out initially.
Yeah.
But eventually it was pretty much well known throughout the company that he was gay, and he was being harassed in certain instances horrifically. He, towards the end of 2000, had gone to his supervisors to say, can we please stop this? This is basically a hostile work environment. And one of his managers actually made it worse.
Oh, nice.
Why don't you do thus and so? And that wasn't going to really address the situation. They did eventually call in one of the guys who had been the worst perpetrator of this. That shut that guy down eventually. But it still kept going and kept going. And he made a complaint. He actually made 6 complaints to the CHRO.
Wow.
The last one took. And what eventually happened was the CHRO basically said, yes, there is a discriminatory practice going on here, and you have the right to sue. So he sued. And the jury found in his favor to the tune of about $30,000, and then because it was a discriminatory act, it got trebled.
Wow.
Which is why it ended up at $94,500. Now, the Supreme Court has to this date not ever really spoken about a hostile work environment like this. And additionally, the $30,000 was an award for emotional distress. Rarely has the Supreme Court supported a verdict of emotional distress by its by itself.
Right.
Okay, but because we had the discrimination aspect thrown into the mix, they basically said, yeah, this is okay. So and by the way, this may well be the first decision by a Supreme Court in any of the states dealing with a hostile work environment for a person who basically the only damage that that person has sustained is emotional damages.
Wow. I am so proud of Connecticut.
We have been on the forefront on a lot of things.
A lot of stuff lately. I mean, we've been in the news the last couple of weeks on some of the things that have been passed.
Yeah. Now, do you think that's a good thing?
Personally, yes.
Okay.
Because it's, I mean, I'm a Libby Democrat. And, repealing death penalty, ka-ching, yes.
I don't have a problem with that, either on a personal or professional basis. I've always had a hard time with the state having the power to end a person's life.
Yeah.
Particularly when there are so many ways that a criminal trial can screw things up.
This is the thing that I've had the problem with. I mean, a couple of issues. One, just the morality. Okay, it's wrong to murder someone, so we're going to murder someone.
Yeah, a little hypocritical.
And then, yes, I mean, the idea that one innocent person could die as a result of, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've heard people argue, oh, well, only in the most obvious cases. Well, who decides what's obvious? And DNA evidence isn't necessarily available for every single case. So, if there's any chance that someone innocent could die, I just think it's just.
One of the things that I saw recently was that DNA initially wasn't really available for more than 18% of the capital crimes. Capital crimes.
Really? These days?
No, it's increased by a lot, but it's still not 100%.
No, it can't. I mean.
And unless you're going to allow for it to be in 100% of the capital crime area,
right,
I really don't think that it's fair or right to put someone's life on the line.
Yeah,
Now, what do you think is going to happen with the guys who are there now?
Well, did they say? I couldn't remember. Did they say?
The bill exempted them specifically.
Yeah, that's
okay. But do you think there's going to be an appeal coming down the line saying equal protection? Hey, you're not going to execute these guys, but you're going to execute us?
Well,
really?
In the case, yeah. Although some of them want to die, I guess, but not a lot. Isn't that? I think that was the only case where he actually died because he.
The only reason why Michael Ross
right.
Got the needle, literally, was because he specifically instructed his attorneys to withdraw all appeals, and he did everything that he could to speed up the process.
Right.
Which was another reason why I wasn't really in favor of, if he wants to go so bad, don't you think the real punishment would be keep him alive?
Right. This is
Just
the other thing.
Saying.
Well, and then the other issue with the death penalty is the continued appeals, so that, friends and loved ones have to keep going back into court.
There's one fellow who's been on death row for 20 years.
Right.
Because of the appeals. And while the federal side has done a lot to limit the number of appeals that you can actually bring, the state has not. And for capital cases, I really don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Because either we were going to kill them or we were going to lock them away for the rest of their lives.
Right.
No hope for parole.
Yeah.
Might want to be sure about that. Now, did you see in today's current front page the inspector for the defense on the two New Haven guys who were convicted? Then the convictions were set aside. Then the Supreme Court reinstated the convictions, but they didn't have one guy go back because he was really sick and ended up dying of colon cancer last October. These two guys were accused of murdering a shop owner of a bodega in New Haven, and allegedly one of the eyewitnesses recanted, which is what allowed for the conviction to be overturned. Now that witness is saying, I was forced to, well, I was bribed to, well, it just, what I said before wasn't right. So
Which one?
the defense, the inspector for the defense, who had found this witness, had gotten the recanting done, is now being arrested for bribing and tampering with a witness.
Oh, my God.
Okay. Now, this witness has already admitted that some of the stuff that she had previously testified to wasn't accurate, wasn't right, i.e., wasn't the truth.
Right.
But the real principal stuff, the identification, that was all right. I got it right on that one. Gee, do you think there's a problem here with the credibility of the state's star witness?
Might. Possibly.
Now, speaking of that particular case, there's another bill that is making its way to Governor Malloy's desk, the so-called racial profiling bill.
Yes.
Now, this bill is actually a modification, if I can find my notes, of the 1999 Allen Penn Racial Profiling Prohibition Act. And the problem with that act was the police weren't following it.
Mm.
And nobody was enforcing it.
Yeah, apparently.
There's been one report filed in the 12 years that the act has been in existence.
Wow.
And as of 2010, only 27 police departments were actually complying with the reporting requirement, which could lead one to understand why there wasn't more than one report done, because if they're not filing their reports, it's kind of hard to figure out whether or not. So there's a new bill.
Yeah.
It just passed the House yesterday, 142 to 1.
Wow.
Who's the one?
Not in East Haven, is it? No.
Maybe.
No. Oh, really?
I don't know. No. We're just funning. But the reason why this bill actually got a fair amount of air, if you will, play, is because of what happened down in East Haven. That's why we were kind of joking about East Haven.
I have to say, by the way, that State Rep Jimmy Albus, who's state Democrat from East Haven, is awesome, and he's been.
I don't think that was the one.
I am positive it wasn't the one, but I just want it stated.
We were just funning, Jamie. We're not accusing you of doing anything bad here.
No, he's done the opposite actually ever since then. He's taken a real leadership role and sort of.
What was interesting was that you had mentioned before the show that there had been a bill that had passed the Senate first.
Yes.
And it was finance related, which is unusual because normally finance stuff originates in the House.
Mm-hmm.
This bill, the racial profiling modification bill, also passed the Senate first.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And what this act does now is it puts Office of Policy and Management in charge of enforcing. Really? Didn't know OPM was going to have, aren't they dealing with budget?
That is an odd jurisdiction, it seems.
Yeah. Well, they're in charge of enforcing, and they also are in charge of compiling the stats. And then they issue it to an advisory board who would then make a report as to whether or not we are engaging in racial profiling throughout the state, or whether certain towns are engaging in racial profiling. Now, another thing that the bill does is it requires the officer involved in the stop. You don't want to necessarily say arresting officer, because an arrest doesn't have to happen in order to generate the form that this officer now has to fill out.
Okay.
This might have been one of the reasons why that one vote voted against it.
Right.
Because of the onerous aspect of yet more paperwork for an officer to fill out, regardless of whether there's an arrest or not. What the report has to indicate was whether or not, the conditions of the stop, why the stop was initiated.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to get the officer's impression before they've actually met up with the driver of the race, gender, ethnicity, color
Wow.
of the driver.
Every time a
Okay.
stop is made.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Okay.
So that might make them want to stop less.
The arresting or the stopping officer also has to provide, the driver with a form that notifies them of the driver of the possibility of bringing a complaint against the officer for a stop that they believe was motivated by race, gender, color,
Wow.
ethnicity, religion, gender identification. Okay. That's really, it sounds good, but let's think about this for a second. Do you really think that an officer is going to be pulling you over because of your gender identification? They're not going to be able to figure out whether you're a guy or a gal until they've walked up to the window.
Right.
And with transgender, they're not going to be able to necessarily tell.
True.
Just saying.
I
Nice
guess they wanted
idea.
to include it.
Yeah, well,
Just-
that's because our broad band of discrimination has gotten broader in this last year.
Right.
Okay, which I applaud. I think it's a good thing. But I think we're starting to go from the sublime to the ridiculous as far as this particular reporting situation is concerned, because I don't think that the officer is going to be able to tell much beyond obvious race, obvious gender.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. Because if they're stopping him for speeding, they didn't get a very good look at the driver. Let me tell you that.
So it's only traffic stops then. It's not seeing
No,
someone on a
it's-
street corner. Or,
Yeah, it does include seeing someone on a
Well,
street
because in
corner.
that case, you might be
You
able
can't.
to tell.
But most of the stops
Right.
are involving motor vehicles.
Yes.
Not necessarily on foot. So that's interesting. By the way, the governor has indicated that he will be more than happy to sign the bill when it makes it to his desk. What are the odds that it makes it to his desk tomorrow?
I know. We've got, just about 24 hours pretty much.
Pretty much. Yeah, there's
Or midnight. Until midnight
the
tomorrow night,
session. Is it? No, I thought it was tonight. May 8th. Midnight, May 8th.
Oh, really? I thought it was midnight tomorrow. You'd think I would know.
I would defer to your...
Not defer to me. I could have sworn that tomorrow was the last day.
Well, I kept hearing the speaker refer to the fact that after May 8th, he was going to be really concentrating on running for Congress.
Okay.
So I'm thinking, now, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking that it's midnight tonight.
Okay.
In which case, we're talking about 4.5, not even 4.5 hours left. Which brings us to the next little story. Well, you know what? We're going to get to that last. Somewhat last. Education reform. What happened? I read the news reports from ctnewsjunkie.com. I'm still trying to figure out what exactly did happen. Do you have a sense?
I have not read the bill, so I can't say. It sounds as if...
There were certain senators who said they hadn't read the bill
Right,
either.
That's true. That's true. I guess I don't have an excuse because
No,
I'm
no,
not
no,
a
no.
Republican. And no, kidding.
This just in, News Talk tonight pulled by the FCC.
Yeah.
We're fair and balanced. Really, we are.
No, I mean, it sounds like there's a little bit for everyone not to like in it, which means it was a good compromise.
Yeah, but are we really looking for good compromises coming out of the legislature?
Well, I mean, it sounds like it took ed reform a few steps along, but not as wholesale as folks wanted, which I think is a good thing. I mean, I was reading earlier about Massachusetts' steps towards ed reform, and they were much more incremental than we've been. I mean, there's no reason for the commissioners' network to have 50 schools. Let's start with 5 and see how that goes.
Why are we trying to bite off as much as we are? We care about kids. I get that. But man.
Well,
Some
the
of the
achievement gap is so scary. I mean,
Yes.
and it's embarrassing. I mean, here we've got Connecticut. I mean, this wealthy state and liberal, and you'd
One of
think
the
that we'd be
5 wealthiest states in the United States.
yeah, and supposedly some of the best public schools in the country.
Yep.
And you've got this horrendous record of an achievement gap, and I can see people saying we have to deal with this now. And, also if you're looking at jobs, I mean, well-educated workforce we need. So, I mean, I can see people really almost kind of panicking and saying, panic is maybe the wrong word, but, we have to get this done and we have to get it done.
There were some educators who were panicking,
well,
frankly.
Unfortunately, I think the rhetoric got very heated on both sides so that, I mean, I would assume that behind closed doors it was actually... There was a lot. I mean, obviously, there was a lot more happening because they actually came out with a bill. But unfortunately, I think the rhetoric just got so polarized that it was hard for me to tell. I mean, I'm interested in this stuff, and it was very hard for me to tell what a good bill would look like because of what I was hearing on both sides. Like this would be horrible, and this would be horrible. It's like, okay, well, then what do you have left if both options are horrible?
Basically, what I'm seeing in the story is that charter school funding was boosted, but it wasn't funded to the extent that the governor had requested. That's kind of understandable given the fact that we were staring at a $284 million deficit straight in the face. Funding for charter schools was increased from $9,400 to $10,500 in the first year, $11,000 in the second, and $11,500 in the third. It also allows nonprofits to operate 6 of the 25 schools identified as turnaround schools.
Okay.
That's interesting. Tenure is now going to be in a situation where if a teacher gets 4 good annual reports, they qualify for tenure.
Okay.
Okay. Which is down from, if I recall correctly, it was something along the lines of you didn't get tenure until you were in there for 10 years. But you still can be terminated for poor performance even if you're tenured.
Right.
That's new.
Okay.
Okay. And that is what has teachers so upset, understandably. Tenure used to mean job security. Tenure meant that you couldn't be fired but for cause. We've now expanded for cause to mean if you're not putting out kids who are testing well, that's cause.
Right.
Yeah. Now, the bill also allows for teacher unions to use impact bargaining to negotiate working condition changes in low-performing schools, and which become a part of the Education Commissioners Network. The bill also includes a pilot program to enhance literacy for kindergarten through grade 3.
Oh, that's good.
And it creates 1,000 new preschool slots, mostly for low-income communities.
That's excellent.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
There was no question that the education studies show that the earlier you get to a kid and the earlier you get the child to be involved in the education process, the better they do overall. Now, it's understandable that not everything got through. I get that. $284,000. I get that. But there's also no question, given how Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford, New London have all tested in the last 5 years, even with what I shudder to call No Child Left Behind.
What about Race to the Top? Oh, we don't get that, though, because we haven't qualified.
We're not in the running. No, there's no question that with the inner city school results being what they are, we had a problem.
Yeah.
And we had a problem that was of, one could even argue, biblical magnitude, because if we are turning out a bunch of kids who can't read beyond the 6th grade level, and they're supposedly dealing with a high school degree, first of all, we devalue the high school degree for all the really good schools.
Right.
that makes it harder for the kids who are coming from any of the schools getting into a decent college of any kind. It would have been nice to see the community college funding get jacked a little bit more, because we need good community colleges.
Yeah, yeah.
And the economy has proven that. And it would have been nice to see UConn and the state universities get funded a little bit more too. Again, it would have been nice if the economy had sufficiently turned around and money started coming into the coffers. We could have done that.
Yeah, that's not happening.
Which brings us to the next story. House approves midterm budget adjustments. You know, in the old days, everybody understood that we were dealing with a biennial budget, i.e., it's voted on and hopefully passed every 2 years.
Right.
But somewhere along the lines, we started tinkering around with it every year. And I think part of the problem was that we were dealing with governors who were complicit with legislative leaders on the financial shell game. Such that, you know, after the income tax was passed and we decided we were going to create this rainy day fund, and we haven't had a rainy day fund fully funded, in fact, funded at all, for the last 3 years, because the economy tanked and because people were not spending as much, weren't being taxed as much.
Right.
Businesses were not earning as much, therefore they were not taxed as much. I get the fact that all that has happened in times past in a cyclical aspect. But we've kind of made it an annual angst thing to revisit the budget after we've done a 2 year. I mean, why don't we just be honest and say we're doing it for 1 year?
I mean, in this case, I mean, it was so out of whack with what they thought.
$3.5 billion deficit. Now it's $284 million.
Right.
Gee, think we did a pretty good job.
I think we did a great job. But it's still, I mean, aren't they sort of required legally to be in balance or whatever?
Yes, but that was a constitutional amendment that was signed into law by ex-felon. I'm sorry, he is a felon. Ex-governor John Rowland. Yet he was one of the worst shell game people to come down the pike. Governor Rell was given kind of a bad rap in that she was given a marked deck to play with.
Right.
To begin with.
Exactly.
And then when she realized that there wasn't going to be a whole lot of transparency in the budgeting process that would do the state any good, she then backed off of a major promise as far as governmental transparency. I don't blame her for that. I don't give her kudos for that, but I don't blame her for that. But then we have our current governor. Now, again, $3.5 billion deficit. I keep knocking the glasses in the microphone. Sorry. That's a really bad hand to be given. But the modified gap promise is going to be an issue that's going to end up biting him in the butt.
Yeah, that was a bridge too far, I think. Well,
we have to try. We have to shoot for the stars in order to make it to the moon.
Yeah.
Okay? I get that too. But to remove the funding for the transition is just giving the other side ammunition to say, see, it's a broken promise.
Right.
Of course, Ben Barnes is saying, no, it's not. It's still the law of the land. We are still going to transition in 2014 to a modified gap.
Well, and didn't they say they could only do that if there was a budget surplus, and there isn't a budget surplus? I mean, isn't that contingent?
Right. But there was a pseudo surplus this last year.
Oh, right.
That turned into not so much a surplus.
Right.
That turned into a big deficit. And it's also confusing when you're tinkering with the budget, whether you're talking about a surplus for this year, or are we talking about a deficit for next year, or what? Okay. My understanding was that we ended up with a $68 million surplus at the end of the last fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
That the $284 million deficit is for this year that ends June 30th.
Okay.
But that we're also looking at a very hefty budget deficit for 2013.
Yeah, bigger one. That's what it looked like.
What I was led to believe in some earlier news stories was that we were dealing with a $68 million deficit year-end June and a $284 million deficit for 2013.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still perplexed. And by the way, folks, I actually do read the news an awful lot, so for me to be perplexed, yikes. Now, did you hear any, was this one of the bills that also ran through the Senate first and then made it to the House?
I don't know. Was it?
I don't know. I'm reading, once again, our friends from CT News Junkie. Thank you, Christine. And in this particular instance, the author is Hugh McQuaid. And Hugh reports that, aside from... Oh, I love this. Representative Richard Smith, Republican from New Fairfield. Quote, "Here we are a year later and the savings have not been met. Nonetheless, the concessions were given and the state is now, whatever the latest numbers are, 284 million, pick a number, under budget."
See, it's not just us.
I know. But seriously, folks, no, the bill is now going to the Senate.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Because under constitutional things, from what I understood, it was supposed to go to the House first. So,
and in fact, it did.
Yes. The amendment that the Republicans offered would set aside $50 million for gap transition. It would also freeze the longevity payments for unionized state employees and eliminate them for others. And it would have eliminated funding for the Citizens Election Program.
I did note that today.
Really, guys? So you want to go back to the big old bad days?
Yeah, that
in
was
election
nutty.
politicking.
That was crazy.
That amendment did get shot down. And surprise, surprise, on party lines.
Yeah.
You know, unfortunately, Hugh only got 2 Democrats to speak on the record about the budget.
Mm-hmm.
The rest were a bunch of Republicans. And shock, surprise, surprise, it's sour grapes. They're really dissing what happened. But, folks, we got to run the government. If we don't run the government, bad things happen. I'm not saying cats living with dogs, plagues,
Yeah.
Armageddon, to quote Ghostbusters, one of my favorite movies. But really bad things would then happen. And the last thing we need to do is to stop the election reform before it's really had a chance to take. And it would take 2 gubernatorial cycles for it to really take.
Yeah. I'd say bless you, but that was a cough.
Why now?
Well, and isn't they're actually proposing a strengthening of it that would add that, I'm trying to remember, that people would have to disclose
$3 million to the gubernatorial race.
An extra $3 million. That's right.
So it goes from $6 to $9 million.
Right.
Now, when you think about it, it's a $284 million deficit, but $3 million is not that much, comparatively speaking.
Yeah.
Given the fact that our budget is $25 billion.
Yeah.
Wow. We spend $25 billion, folks, a year. Wow.
Yeah.
And last but not least, what could be the death knell of Susan Bysowitz's campaign for the Senate, U.S. Representative Christopher Murphy has accepted the endorsement of the Connecticut Democratic Hispanic Caucus. And they made that announcement today. Ouch.
I don't see that stopping her from continuing to run.
Oh, I don't see that necessarily stopping her, but what it may do is, we have a convention coming up.
Yes, we do.
And if memory serves correctly, it's going to be this Saturday.
Yes.
And in order for the former Secretary of State to be able to do anything beyond the convention, she's going to have to poll 15% of the delegates.
Yep.
Given that Governor Malloy, Lieutenant Governor Wyman, the current Speaker of the House,
The entire congressional delegation.
And now the Connecticut Democratic Hispanic Caucus,
Yeah.
have all thrown their weight. And by the way, the Hispanic vote these days, there's a lot of Hispanic voters. Why is that important? Because they actually show up
Right.
at the polls. They vote. This means that what we're seeing is a juggernaut coming into the convention. And how many delegates are going to be swayed by the fact that their nominal leader, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the entire congressional delegation are all pulling for this one particular candidate? How much of an effect that's going to have when it comes time to vote?
It's going to be really interesting because you'd think it would have a lot of pull. But I also keep hearing that, she just has an intensely loyal group of supporters.
And they're from Middletown.
No, but even in other DTCs, and I might not sit well with some people. Oh, this is a foregone conclusion. Don't kick her out. And
It's
I don't
not
know.
a foregone conclusion. I get why they would rapidly hold on to hope. But when you have 50 Democratic town committees already outright endorsing...
No, I believe me, I agree with you, but I'll be curious to see if it plays. I'm not saying I don't think it may well play out that way, but knowing Susan's base, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't shock me if she managed to squeak out 15%.
I know a delegate to the convention who hails from a town whose town committee, the only endorsement that they have made thus far is for Chris Murphy.
Yeah.
Okay. And this particular delegate mentioned that pertinent fact to Ms. Bysowitz when she called the delegate. Well, that doesn't mean that you have to vote that way. No, it doesn't. We each have an independent vote. I get that, says the delegate. Says Ms. Bysowitz, I really hope I can count on your vote. Well, I'd like to, says the delegate, but I got to tell you, when the governor, the lieutenant governor, and everybody else who's going to be in my delegation is voting one way, I'm not going to be real popular if I vote for you, even if I want to.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true.
Says Ms. Bysowitz to the delegate, but you can still vote that way because you're independent. Thank you. I'll keep that in mind, says the delegate.
She is nothing if not persistent.
Very persistent. Interesting fact. My wife went to school with her.
Oh.
In elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
She hasn't changed.
By the way, that she sent a letter to all delegates to the convention this Saturday asking that they consider her, and they did not edit. They didn't take a look at all the delegates. You know who one of the delegates was?
Who?
Kenny Curran.
Oh, no.
That would be Chris Murphy's campaign manager.
Yeah. Yeah.
He posted it on Facebook.
That's unfortunate.
You would just think that they would, I mean, there's not so many delegates that you can't pull some of the obvious ringers.
Doug Hardy has joined the chat room, and he wrote at 7:47, "Shoot those stars." When I was saying you had to shoot for the star,
Yes.
the moon. He just posted "Delegates wanted." Delegates for sale or rent. No. That's a bad thing. Yeah, well, there is a point to gaining a certain level of momentum or bump coming from a primary. I get that. I'm thinking, though, that from a Democratic perspective, you probably would rather not have a primary and let the Republicans primary it out,
absolutely.
which they will.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have no doubt that Chris Shays will garner enough support from Fairfield, possibly from Litchfield.
Mm-hmm.
He's not going to be well known in the eastern part of the state.
Right.
And frankly, Linda McMahon has been putting out some very smart, well, actually one very smart ad.
I haven't looked at it.
I did because you do need
should.
to understand. Yeah. And it's actually a very attractive ad.
I'm sure it is. I mean,
she speaks about how she grew up in low-income housing until they moved into a house that had been built by her father. How they had a hard time making ends meet for many years, but they had a lot of love. And this is almost a verbatim. How she met her husband in college, how they got married her senior year. The day before they graduated, they find out that she's pregnant. How they, again, continued to struggle to make ends meet, but, as a working mom, she helped make it happen. How
what did she do to her daughter in the ring? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Pile drive?
There was something not
one of those helicopter moves.
Cool.
She actually didn't throw her on the canvas, which was good. But yeah, no, she was demonstrating that, hey, anybody can do this.
I'm just imagining a remix of the ad. I'm just saying.
I know.
We could intercut that with some good footage of her as a working mom.
Are you listening, Chris? Anyways, she then points out that she and her husband created this entertainment organization that actually had to go bankrupt at one point in time. But now they've made a decent amount of money. So she knows what it's like to be a working mom. She knows what it's like to be trying to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. She knows what it's like to be in Connecticut. That is really the sum and substance of her ad. Very slick.
Yep.
Very well produced. And it's a good narration. And she comes across as being sympathetic and, to a limited degree, empathetic. Until you come across what happened in 2010. 50 million? Really? You spent, and you're ready to spend another 50 million?
The thing is,
Wow.
She really doesn't get Connecticut if she
How are
thinks
you
that's
empathizing with us if
Yeah.
you think that spending 50 million cash for what is at best a 50-50 proposition, is your ego that big? Apparently so. Apparently so. Speaking of big egos, we only have a couple minutes left, but we've got some very interesting national races that you were pointing out.
Yeah.
Indiana.
Yep.
Talking about ego.
Dick Lugar.
There were a bunch of people that, from national, that were advising him, you need to do what Senator McCain did. You need to do what some of these other guys who have faced off challengers and beat them. You need to follow that playbook.
Yeah.
No. He said no. Now, he's got a huge war chest. Not going to be able to spend it because the polls are showing he's 5 to 10 points behind.
Unbelievable.
Wow. Now, the other playbook that he was asked to follow Orrin Hatch. They came into the Senate at the same time. Hatch was able to beat down his opponent. Not going to happen with Dick Lugar. Now, the question is, if that's the case, and the winning candidate is supported by the Tea Party, does that mean that Indiana might end up with a Democratic senator?
Do we? Who is the Democratic candidate? I don't know.
It's not on my radar screen yet.
Right.
Now, the other thing, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
What's happening out there?
Recall vote. I mean, no, not today. I'm sorry. It's the primary between the Democrats.
Right.
The woman who is supported by the unions is actually a little bit behind Barrett, who I'm trying to remember exactly who he is, but he's got a very good chance. He's polling, I believe, ahead.
Well, that should be very interesting.
Fascinating.
That should be very interesting. But you've had News Talk tonight, folks. I'm Dave Moore, Jen Just with me, and we've been sponsored by Gateway Financial, ctdentist.com, Deepwater Seafood of Avon, Sherpa Technologies, and there's two more. Come on. There's two. I swear there's two more. Sandits Travel and Bubwitz and Meyerjack. Woohoo. There we go. Jen, thank you for tonight.
Happy to be here.
I'm looking forward. I know that your schedule is going to be
kind of crazy.
Hither and yon.
I will actually be here next week, though.
Excellent. We will have an awesome news show for you next week. We'll even be prepared. I know. Fascinating. Thanks for listening tonight, and see you next week.
You're on the Horn. OnTheHorn.com.
Slow down, baby. Living must fast. Slow down, baby. You're moving must fast. You gotta tell me that you love me if you want this moment to last. I said, slow down, baby.